This video is going to be a review on integers. So we are going to talk about the absolute value of positive and negative integers, comparing our integers to one another using the less than, greater than, or equal sign, ordering integers from least to greatest that involve also absolute value, as well as all the operations with integers. So we're going to go ahead and get started with absolute value. So our first slide says to find the absolute value. So here we have three separate problems, and what we need to remember is for our absolute value, that is the distance a number is from 0. So here our numbers, our answers cannot be negative, because if we're talking distance, distance can't be negative. So we would think about this first problem, the absolute value of -1, as like how far away is -1 from 0 on the number line. So here the answer would be a +1, since distance is always positive. Our second question is the absolute value of 15. If we were to plot 15 on a number line, we would see how far away that was from 0. So our answer would be 15. And then lastly, the absolute value of -37 would just be a positive 37. So really with absolute value, we're just talking the distance that number is from 0. The distance from 0. We're going to go ahead on to our next slide here, and it says complete the statement using the less than, the greater than, or the equal to sign. So again, we've got three problems. The way I approach these problems are I first look at any absolute value bars. So our first one has the absolute value of -6, and I actually write that value above that absolute value. So the absolute value of -6, or how far away is -6 from 0, would be a 6. So now I'm comparing that value to our other integer. So if I'm comparing 6 and 6, we would actually fill in that blank with an equal to sign. So our second problem is comparing 0 and the absolute value of 3. So the absolute value of 3, I'm going to put the value above, which is 3. So now I'm comparing 0 and 3. The 3 is larger than 0, so I would fill that blank in with a less than sign, so 0 is less than 3. And then our last one, there's actually two absolute values. So here I'm going to actually solve both of those first and then compare our values. So the absolute value of -5 is 5. The absolute value of -9 is 9. And if we're looking at those two values, 9 is larger. So we would put 5 is less than 9. So when you do these problems, solve the absolute value bars first, and then compare the two values. Our third slide here is ordering from least to greatest. And that's really, really important to pay attention to. Make sure we go least to greatest. So again, with these problems, because some of them are absolute value bars, I solve that part first. I'm going to look at this first one here. The absolute value of -3 is 3. And then the absolute value of 7, or the absolute value of 7 is 7. So when I order these numbers, I need to make sure I put them in their original form. So when I actually put this negative absolute value of -3 in my problem, I'm going to write it this way, not with 3. So I'm going to look for my negative numbers first, since those are always the smallest. I have this -6. So I have -6, and I cross off my numbers as I do this so I don't get confused or forget a number. +2 would be next. Then looking at values, 3 would be next, but my original form would be the absolute value of -3. Then I would have my 5 and the absolute value of 7. And I have those in least to greatest. I'm going to go to my second one. Again, I'm going to actually solve these absolute values first to make sure. I start with my negatives. So I have two negatives here. And the number that's farthest away when I'm talking negatives is the number that's the smallest. So -5 would come first. Then I would have -2. Then I would have my +2. The absolute value of -3 would come next, because that value is 3. And then the absolute value of 4. So be careful when you're putting these in least to greatest order. Make sure you write an original form, and be careful with your negative numbers. Remember that the negative number that's farthest from 0 is the smallest value. Now we're going to actually move on into integer operations. So we're going to start with addition here. So I came up with 3 different types of problems. And all we need to do here is add. Now, we talked a little bit in class about our canceling out. So I'm actually going to do one of these with canceling our zero pairs. And then if you decide not to use that method, that's completely fine. So here we have a positive 6 plus a negative 3. So I'm going to have my positives be closed circles. I'm going to draw 6 of those. And then my negatives are going to be open circles. And when I have a zero pair, that's when one positive and one negative cancel each other out. I've got a couple of those here actually. And I've got 3 of those solid dots left over. And those each stand for a positive. So our answer here, 6 plus a negative 3, is a positive 3. And you can also think about it in the beginning. We've got more positives than negatives, so I know my answer is going to be positive. Our second question has 4 negatives plus another 5 negatives. So here, since they have the same sign, we just add the values, 4 and 5, and we keep our sign. So 4 plus 5 is 9. Since they're both negative, our answer is negative 9. And you can think about this like there are 4 negatives here, 5 more negatives there, so total I have 9 negatives. And my last problem is negative 7 plus 3. So this one's really similar to our first one. Here I have more negatives than positives, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And if I think about it with our circles, I have 7 negatives and then 3 positives. My zero pairs cancel out. I'm left with 4 open circles, which stand for negatives. So my answer would be negative 4. So that's our addition there. Now we're going to go ahead on into subtraction. Our first one is 10 minus a negative 3. Now we talked about, again, in class, when these two symbols are right next to each other, the subtraction sign and that negative sign, those two become a positive. So this actually turns into 10 plus 3, which is just a basic addition problem. So our answer is actually 13. Our next one's a little bit different. We're at negative 2 minus 10. So this one can be a little tricky. I like to think about this one if we were on a number line. So if we're at 0, negative 1, negative 2, we're here, and we're taking 10 more away. So we're going to go more in the negative direction, 10 more in the negative. So we would hop down 10 more, and we'd end up at negative 12. So negative 2, and we take more away, it's going to become more negative, not go up in the positive direction. That one can be a little bit tricky. And then our last problem here for subtraction, negative 9 minus a negative 9. So then that subtraction and my negative sign are right next to each other. Again, I circle those, turn that into an addition sign. So negative 9 plus 9. And those are actually opposites. And when you add opposites together, you get 0. Negative 9 negatives, 9 positives, they cancel each other out completely, and you're left with nothing. Go ahead on into a word problem. So it says you start hiking at an elevation that is 80 meters below base camp. You increase your elevation by 42 meters. What is the new elevation with respect to base camp? So I'm going to draw myself a picture. I'm very visual, so I like to have pictures. I'm going to have my base camp here, and that's going to stand kind of like 0. And I start 80 meters below base camp. So if I'm thinking below 0, that's going to be negative 80. Now I increase my elevation by 42, which means I'm going up 42. So if I started at negative 80 and I climb 42 meters, I'm adding 42. So I'm going up 42. So this is becoming less negative. But since we started really, really negative, our answer is going to end up staying negative. So our answer here would be negative 38. So with respect to base camp, that would be 38 meters below base. 38 meters below base. So let's go ahead on now into multiplication and division. Multiplication and division actually have the same rules when it comes to integers. So if we have same sign, our answer is positive. If we have different signs, our answer is negative. And that goes for multiplication and division. When I go through these, I actually decide first if my answer is going to be positive or negative. So I'm doing a negative divided by a negative, that's going to be positive. So once I know that, I can go ahead and just focus on the values. 12 divided by 4. And so 12 divided by 4 would be 3. My answer is positive, so my final answer is a positive 3. My second problem has a positive number times a negative, so my answer here will be negative. And when I have a number next to a set of parentheses, that means multiplication. So now 7 multiplied by 4 gives me 28. I already decided that would be negative, so my answer is negative 28 there. My third question is negative 2 times negative 6. That will be positive because a negative times a negative is a positive. So 2 multiplied by 6 gives me 12. So my final answer is a positive 12. And then lastly, negative 18 divided by 6. Those have different signs. So my answer is again negative. So 18 divided by 6 gives me 3. So my final answer is negative 3. So our last problem for this video is a quick little word problem. It says find the mean of the following numbers. And remember, when we're finding mean, we have to find the sum of all of these numbers first, and then divide by how many numbers there are. So we're going to actually add up all of those numbers. And when we add that up, we get a negative 20. So because negative 4 plus negative 5 gives us negative 9, plus 2 more negatives is negative 11, plus 6 more negatives is negative 17, plus 3 more negatives is negative 20. So that's our sum there. But to find the mean, we need to take that negative 20 and we need to divide it by how many numbers there are, which here are 5. So now we're talking about a division problem with a positive and negative integer. So since our two integers have different signs, our answer is actually going to be a negative number. So 20 divided by 5 gives me 4. I already said our answer would be negative, so my final answer here is negative 4. The mean of the following numbers is negative 4. This concludes our video on integers, absolute value, ordering integers, and comparing integers, both positive and negative. So feel free to rewatch any section you need, review notes, review old homework that's graded, and good luck studying.